Yes.
What did you become a test?
Oh, which one?
Oh, which one?
Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started now. We're still going to go ahead and get started. We're going to finish up today with our, we're going to finish on chapter 14. We were on the parasympathetic system. Anybody have any questions on anything? So.
Well, we were kind of talking about the previous exam. We can get into it maybe after class or something, but I think we did want to raise some things. Did you say that, Randy?
Well, I mean, I'll be glad to talk about that.
That's all.
If anybody has any questions on the last exam, I'm always willing to go over it and look it over to make sure that nobody got shortchanged because eLearn did something. Because even now, even after going through it extensively before the test went out, I keep finding mistakes and errors. And there's always the concern that a question that you thought was a really good question turns out to be a real,
Real sticker.
I made a 68.
well, thank you for sharing that. I wish you hadn't, but I wish you hadn't earned a 68, but I'll take a look at your test too. So
Okay, so trying to bump my grades up because it hasn't been the best. So if I do the soft chalks, which I'm definitely gonna do, because there's 3 of those I can do, which ones are they?
what if,
They're under
The
grades.
reason we asked is, I saw this as well, there's 2 things with the soft chalks I want to bring up actually. One thing is that it looks like I might be just not cross-referencing them properly, but it looks like the soft chalks that are marked as extra credit on like the content page, it like has an extra credit in the title, are different from at least a couple of the ones that are in the actual grade book.
don't worry about it, as long as you end up with 25 points, that's all I care about.
Does it have to be all 25?
If you want to, you get 5 points for every soft chalk that you do. That's how I set it up. So do the ones marked extra credit. You'll get 25 points total. That's all I'm allowed to give.
Okay.
So it's in the syllabus. Division policy is no more than 25 points of extra credit. And the soft chalks force you to go all the way through. And they're tedious, but it also serves as a good reminder tool and a learning tool. You're concerned about the extra credit points. Now, what am I going to do with the extra credit? Okay, let me explain here. This is a good time. There are 5 lecture exams. They are worth 500 points total. Okay. Each lecture exam is 100 points, right? Don't look so shocked. There are 5 lecture exams. Each one's worth 100 points. That's worth 500 points. Everybody see me in this, okay? What's so hard about this?
I think they don't like the comparison from the exam you made a 68 on being worth 100 points and the thing they spend a bunch of time on being 25, but.
I have no control over that. Throw stuff at me, that's fine, but I can't do anything about it. So the lecture exams are where your points are. Soft chalks are nice, but they're not, they're there as a learning tool, not as a earning points. You pick up points for it. Now, I mean, I could just as easily have not done it because I do not believe in extra credit. Because the people that get extra credit are usually the ones that don't need the extra credit. I found that in the past. So, yes, ma'am.
If we have a pass exam that we want you to look at, will you look
I'll be happy to. Just tell me and I'll look at it. I have no problem with that at all.
at? I have an exam.
Okay.
I will say I did a couple of the soft chalks, or at least worked through one of them, and then maybe did another one and got to a point where I just had to stop. And I'm probably not going to do all of them because it would be more important for me to prioritize actually doing well in the exams and then the final.
Mhm.
So I'm going to allocate my time there. But I will say that with a couple of them, I noticed some issues that made things difficult. So I just want to ask for, say, Riley's sake, if she decides to do them. First of all, do we need to get all of the points to get the bonus credit?
No,
Okay.
no. I just want you to do them. Now, the other thing is that this will sound really mean, but the soft chalks have been there since January. I got to say that they've been there since January. I announced them in January. Nobody listened, because of all the people that are asking to turn them back on, turn them back on. Apparently they had a glitch in there that shut them down over the weekend. But they've been out there since January. I used to open up an exam and leave it open until, I used to open up the exams the first day of class and leave them open until the last day of classes. And everybody ended up waiting to the last minute. It's human nature to, who's going to take the test on time when you're supposed to? We all would do that. I know I'd do it. I'd wait to the last second, Well, I
At least you're
would.
honest.
Hmm?
At least you're honest.
Yeah. So that's why the problem with the extra credit is if I don't set it to the end of the semester, everybody will be asking me, can you turn it back on, turn it back on? I have not found a good way to do something with extra credit. I'm not a fan of it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I just want to ask about something else. If we just need to run through and do our best with the questions, this shouldn't be much of an issue, but I figure.
If you just, I'm more concerned that you did it, not any kind of points you earn on it. The fact that you did it gets you the 5 points.
Okay.
Don't worry about any score that it's giving you.
So does it detect that we do the practice questions or something? Is that how it works?
I have no idea how it works. I can't do a thing about the soft chalks. I can't even edit them. I can't fix any problems. They're not mine.
I
So,
have a question
yes,
about,
ma'am.
end of the semester grades.
Yes,
So you said there's 500 points, right, for tests?
right.
How many points you need at the end of the semester for a B?
There are 600 points total, counting the final exam. You need to have 480 points total for a B. The 25 points of extra credit
Yeah, 400.
is just enough to boost your grade from one level to another.
Okay, good.
So,
Well, I might get a C.
But I was just going to bring up that with the soft chalks in the case that we do them and we get weird scores and everything. When I did one of them, I was under the impression that the score you got for extra credit was based on how well you did on the questions. So that's why I stopped. But there was two things that I saw. Well, actually 3 things. One that you might have heard of before is one of the things where it's you pick from the anatomical position, different body parts and everything. Most of it worked very well. There was one part though, maybe around the eye or something, where it was asking for something and you couldn't click anywhere where it was actually showed in the diagram without it marking it as wrong, and you can't go back and do it a second time without going back 20 questions.
yeah, that's something I don't like about soft chalk.
And it's just a software.
And I may not do it again in the fall semester.
And then the other thing, this might be because of extensions I have on my web browser, but some of them were
Probably.
here's an image, what is this? And it just didn't load for me, so I wasn't able to do those questions, and I wasn't sure if that was going to affect if I could actually
No.
get the extra credit or not. And then the last thing is, there was another one where it was multi-select, matching questions, the box, and it shows a grid, you click the ones that are right, and then it brings you through. Some of them worked where if I missed one and I had to click through the rest of them to restart, it would let me do that. But there was one where I clicked one wrong, and since you picked the wrong answer for one, you can't get the right answer for it, so you just got to match everything else. When I got through with it to restart so I could get a better score, it didn't let me restart. So I wasn't able to do anything else. And since it's a one-run thing where if you want to get the points for everything, you got to run through all in one go. If I missed that one thing, I wasn't able to reset it without restarting the entire soft chalk. So that's why I gave up on it. So
Okay.
knowing that we don't need to get perfect scores, I'll probably go ahead and do them.
Okay, so this is gonna make me rethink the use of soft chalk. This is the first time I've tried them. Everybody in Morristown swears by them. Everybody over here swears at them. So, okay. Let me get started here. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, so let's move on. I want to get into get back to chapter 14. Let's get, here we go. And there we are. Okay, we're talking in chapter 14. We don't need to be on the screen. Thank you. There we go. Talking about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. We're talking about the autonomic nervous system. There is no lab final. 4 tests, that's all. There is no final in lab. That's the good news. So, and there is no bad news on that. So, okay. So the autonomic nervous system is the, yes. Oh, thank you.
That was my bad.
That's 2 days in a row I forgot. So, okay. Well, everybody else can see it. Why do you think y'all are special?
Because we're actually here.
Oh, that's true. Good point. I stand corrected. And come on. Oh, good. Okay. Parasympathetic and sympathetic sides of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is the subconscious control system. It controls the muscles that we don't have to think about. It controls the heart. It controls the smooth muscle around our digestive system and around our blood vessels. It allows our blood to be routed around to where we need it and where we don't need it. We can take it away from there. It doesn't tell our heart to beat, but it tells our heart to speed up or slow down. It tells our lungs to breathe faster or breathe slower. It tells us to shiver when we're cold and sweat when we're hot. And all of it is subconscious. And it's divided up into the parasympathetic side, which is the dominant side, the rest and digest and defecate side, and the sympathetic side, the fight or flight side, the let's get out of here in a hurry or let's do something side. Now, parasympathetic side is the dominant side of the autonomic system. This allows us to use as little energy as possible to do things. We rest, we digest food, we repair cells, we maintain things. It is the digestion, diuresis, urination. It's digest, urinate, and defecate. We call it rest and digest and defecate, for example. I've got another question here. No, just this class has the final. So, okay. You have a large meal. You have a very big meal. Your body goes into a parasympathetic mode at this point. Your digestive system is very active, processing the food you have eaten. You have to get it down through the esophagus, down to the stomach. From the stomach, it is churned in 3 different directions and mixed with hydrochloric acid and breaking up proteins and finishing the job of breaking up carbs. And then the mixture coming out of the stomach goes into the small intestine where we break up more proteins and go after the fats. And then the next 20 feet of the small intestine, we're busy absorbing nutrients. And then the last 5 feet of the large intestine, we're going after indigestible material that is considered feces. And then at some point when our rectum fills up and puts pressure on the walls of the rectum, the fecal matter accumulates in the rectum, puts pressure there, we'll have an urge to defecate. So, but our blood pressure is down at this point. Our heart rate is down. Our breathing rate is all down while we're, after a large meal. The only thing that's activated that's really busy is our digestive system. The gastrointestinal tract from the esophagus down to the anus is very busy. Our eyes are only focused on things up close. The ciliary body that holds the lens in place and shapes the lens is accommodated for close vision only. You're sitting in front of the TV, and you're just sort of zoned out because you're relaxed, very, very relaxed. So you're not doing anything strenuous. This is the dominant system in our body. Now, we don't activate the whole body with the parasympathetic system. The sympathetic response is different. Sympathetic response is designed for fight or flight, stand and fight, run away, process information, do amazing things, leap over tall buildings, things like that. The parasympathetic system does not have a parasympathetic response throughout the body. Now it uses acetylcholine to Parasympathetic system uses acetylcholine as its neurotransmitter, but it is not excitatory everywhere. We are used to acetylcholine being the excitatory neurotransmitter in skeletal muscle. You know, when we open up the ligand gates at the motor end plate and sodium rushes in and we depolarize the motor end plate, and maybe if we hit threshold, we get an action potential. We're used to that. Now, in some cases here, we're going to see that kind of similar action. We narrow our airway. Acetylcholine, when released into the smooth muscle around our airway, causes the smooth muscle to constrict. So our airway narrows because we don't need a, you know, we're sitting there, you know, we've eaten a large meal, we're relaxing, we're half asleep or half awake, you know, depending on your point of view. And you don't need a lot of air because you're just sort of sitting there just very relaxed. However, we're also stimulating the muscles around the digestive tract. So we're releasing acetylcholine into the smooth muscle around our airway, and it's constricted. We're releasing acetylcholine into the smooth muscle around the gut, and it's very active. It's constricting and relaxing, constricting and relaxing. The detrusor muscle is drawing the testes up close to the abdominal wall in males, and the ciliary muscles, these around the lens, are constricted, allowing us to see things very well up close. Those are all stimulatory actions. At the same time, though, we're not releasing a lot of acetylcholine into the heart. Or rather, we're releasing, let me back up. We're not releasing a lot of epinephrine into the heart from the sympathetic side. We're releasing a lot of acetylcholine into the heart. Now remember, acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter of choice for the parasympathetic system. So if you're looking at the gut, acetylcholine is causing the gut to become very active. But if we release a lot of acetylcholine into the heart slows down. I think I made this point the other day. The more acetylcholine, the more the vagus nerve is stimulated, the more acetylcholine we release into the heart slows down. So our heart rate goes down, and when the heart rate goes down, our blood pressure goes down. Our blood vessels dilate. That means they enlarge because we're very relaxed. Because our heart rate's down, so the blood vessels dilate. Because if the heart rate's down, it means the blood pressure's down, so we don't have to, you know, we don't need to be our vessels can open wide and just let the blood flow. We relax our sphincters. The urinary sphincter and the anal sphincter are going to relax. And so the urge to urinate, the urge to defecate is going to rise. And so these are all separate things going on. We have, you know, it isn't just everybody relax. Some of the actions we have are relaxing and some are stimulating. Because when we are in a parasympathetic mode, we are more than likely processing food that we've just eaten. It's a 6 or 8 hour process from the time we eat something to the time it moves into the large intestine. So we're going to be pretty busy for a while. Now we lead in, you know, parasympathetic responses are all focused on rest and digest. And they are always dominant over the sympathetic side. The sympathetic responses are going to be short-term responses. Parasympathetic is much longer. So now let's move on here. Defecation is a sympathetic response. I mean, a parasympathetic response. When a person eats food and it has to go down the esophagus into the stomach, from the stomach it's processed into this goopy mixture called chyme. It has the consistency of condensed soup. I always think it looks sort of like condensed cream of mushroom soup. You know, they take it out of the can, whoop, you know, and it sort of wiggles a little bit, you know, and it's sort of gray and pasty looking. That's sort of what it looks like with the chunky stuff inside still there. And as that moves through the small intestine, we take out all the good stuff, the nutrients, and the stuff that's left behind is the indigestible material, the fiber of all the foods we've eaten. And that ends up in the large intestine. And we suck out water from it, and bacteria that live there generate vitamin K. And then finally it moves into the rectum, because this large intestine goes the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, the rectum, and then the anus. And so when we fill up the sigmoid colon and the rectum with fecal matter, it stretches the walls of the rectum, it stretches the walls of the sigmoid colon, and that will trigger a reflex. Stretching the walls of the sigmoid colon and the rectum will trigger a reflex, causing them to contract. The sigmoid colon dumps all the fecal matter into the rectum. The rectum will have another reflex enough to force open the anal sphincter. Because while we have control over our sphincters, you know, we learn how to become toilet trained when we're kids, when we're infants, children, whatever, maybe. And at some point we learn how to hold it. Well, that's not a permanent hold. We can't, there is the force of the pressure of the fecal matter in the rectum is stimulating a reflex action that will eventually force that sphincter open. We can't hold it indefinitely because the reflex will eventually win out. And it also applies to the urinary sphincter at the urethra. So, and so we lose control eventually. Now I think I mentioned the other day about, a person who is so terrified that they can overwhelm their normal, they may not have a whole lot of food or fecal matter or a full bladder or anything, but they can be so terrified that they will blast past any sympathetic response and go right into parasympathetic and empty their bladder and bowels when they're terrified. So, okay, so this little animation here shows you who does what when we're comparing the sympathetic to parasympathetic. So for example, you can work. There we go. Sympathetic side will always cause the heart rate to increase. The parasympathetic side causes the heart rate to slow down. Whatever, if it doesn't show anything on the parasympathetic side, it's because it's the opposite action. So the parasympathetic side causes heart rate to slow down. The sympathetic side causes it to go up. The veins will constrict to raise our blood pressure. In the parasympathetic side, they will dilate. The bronchioles will dilate on the sympathetic side so we get more air. When a person is going into a fight or flight response, they will raise their heartbeat, their heart rate. They will constrict their veins to reduce flow to unnecessary structures. They will dilate their airways so they can breathe faster, get more oxygen in, pump more blood to the areas that need it, the brain, the muscles, the lungs, and the heart will get more blood. The skin, forget it. Digestive system, forget it. Reproductive system, forget it. Urinary system, forget it. Yeah, they're unessential, at least for the 4 or 5 minutes of a fight or flight response. You're going to send lots of blood and lots of oxygen and lots of glucose to the brain, to the heart, the lungs, and the skeletal muscle. Parasympathetic side causes the gut to become more active to process food. It tells the liver to create and store more glycogen. It tells the gallbladder to release bile. Now the liver makes bile and stores it in the gallbladder. The bile is the material that chops up fat so that we can process it. We have to chop the fat up into very tiny pieces so we can absorb it in our small intestine. You know, it doesn't go across cells very easily because fat is made up of large molecules. So we chop it up into little itty bitty pieces. Our kidneys will get rid of urine. We'll urinate. Our urinary bladder will contract so we can urinate, because it's all part of putting us into a more relaxed state. I mean, if you have to pee, you're not comfortable. You know, the urge to urinate sort of sets in the background there and just sort of, you know, is a constant, you know. I mean, who hasn't woken up in the middle of the night to go pee for whatever reason? You know, yeah. So, okay, we're not getting personal here, but you know, it's okay. Just eat your candy. It's okay. So
I will eat my.
I just told you to. So
Tom's so
okay.
good.
Now, we do find though that there is one area where both the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems work together. And that is in the male and female sexual response. The parasympathetic system causes increased blood flow to the erectile tissue in both males, which is the penis, and the clitoris and the nipples in the female. When the female and the male become sexually aroused, it is driven by the parasympathetic side. So up until the point of orgasm, it's parasympathetic. Orgasm in males and females is driven by the sympathetic side, ejaculation and the contractions of the vagina and the uterus in the female. So those are all going to be sympathetic responses. Everything up to that point, everything up to orgasm, the arousal and increased blood flow is going to be parasympathetic. So we'll spend a lot of time discussing the sexual response in AP2. So now we have the sympathetic side, the fight or flight side. This is where we release lots of energy to get our muscles working. We call it the exercise, excitement, emergency, and embarrassment system. When we are embarrassed, that is a sympathetic response. When we get excited, it's a sympathetic response. In an emergency, it's a sympathetic. When we respond to it, it's a sympathetic response. When we become scared of something, your amygdala recognizes and initiates the fear response. You know, your limbic system kicks in and does that. Whoops, it is scary. What do? Do I run away as fast as I can? Do I turn around and stand and fight? Or do I stand there and try and process and not do anything? Because people tend to have three different types of responses. They either run as fast as they can away from something, they turn around and face the problem, or they stand there and these are the ones that forget how to dial 911. When they say, you know, dial 911, you know, you tell somebody to go, you know, call the police, fire, whatever, and they can't process it because their brain is sort of locked into a loop of what to do. It has nothing to do with character.
Sort of like a statue.
Yeah, they sort of stand there. They're in shock, essentially. You know, and all of our responses, the three choices that we have, are pretty much chemically controlled. You know, the overriding urge to run away is a chemical reaction. So is the urge to run towards the problem is a chemical urge. So is being immobilized. You know, it doesn't have a lot to do with character. You know, individuals that run toward an emergency have to be taught how to do that. You know, that's not a natural, you know, for many people, that's not a natural reaction. Most people want to get away. So during a sympathetic response, our heart rate goes up, our breathing rate goes up, our pupils dilate so we can see better. Our skin gets cold because we're not sending a lot of blood to the skin anymore. Our mouth will get dry because we're not generating a lot of saliva. The same thing happens when we are engaged in some sort of physical activity. We're sending blood to our heart and to our muscles. Our airways open up. During physical activity of some sort in a fight or flight response, we will dump a lot of glucose out of our liver. We'll see in AP2 that, when we need more energy, we will release more glucose from the liver. Now there's a hormone. There's two hormones involved here. One's called glucagon. Glucagon is the antagonist to insulin. You've all heard of insulin. We release insulin when our blood sugar gets too high. It allows us to put sugar into our cells. Glucagon is the antagonist. Glucagon says if our blood sugar is too low, because we didn't eat anything today, for example, if our blood sugar is too low, then we'll release some glucose from the liver to bring it back up. It's how we maintain homeostasis. Blood sugar up, insulin comes out. Blood sugar down, glucagon comes out, blood sugar comes up, blood sugar goes down. So we keep it balanced. Epinephrine also tells the liver to release glucose. Epinephrine, during a fight or flight response, we release epinephrine and norepinephrine. Epinephrine tells the liver, hey, why don't you break down some glycogen and make some glucose for us, because we need some energy. Well, at the same time, and that's great. And so we get glucose. An interesting thing you'll see in AP2 is that glucagon and epinephrine work together to give us a greater surge of glucose than we would get from either one of them. So, and one of the consequences of that surge of glucose, is that you have a tremendous amount of energy available to do things. You hear about the people that pick a car up off of a child or put the car back on the child. It depends on if you like the kid or not, okay? People do amazing things in stressful situations. Where do they get the energy for their muscles? It's that surge of epinephrine and glucagon driving the release of a whole bunch of glucose so they can do things. And then what's the consequences? They're exhausted. They're sitting on the side of the road with a blanket wrapped around them and they're barely awake because there's a massive surge of energy release and they're thirsty and they're cold and they're tired. And in the middle of the summer, you see people sitting along the side of the road after an accident wrapped up in a blanket, or they've evacuated from a building that's burning, or there's some disaster. And they got a blanket wrapped around them. And it's 90 degrees outside and they're cold because they've gone through a very stressful situation where they've released a lot of energy and now their body's recovering from it. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a way to accidentally set off your fight response? Like if you're an anxious person normally?
Yeah, there's people, we call them adrenaline junkies that do things, I don't mean that you're an adrenaline junkie, but that people do things that will excite them and scare them. So they get that surge. They like the surge of adrenaline, of epinephrine. This feeling of excitement, of racing heart rate, and rapid breathing rate, and this epinephrine running through the system, and all the sugar being released at once. Some people like that. So yes, it can be triggered accidentally. Lots of people do it deliberately. If there are people that like to free climb, on a rock face, without a rope, and a very dangerous, sport, for example. So things like that. People that like to skydive, people that like to use those, what are those suits called? The wing suits or whatever, they can fly, and glide down. all it takes is one, accident, and you're not flying, you're falling. You're demonstrating that gravity still wins. People do these extreme sports because they like the thrill of what they're attracted to, and they're not aware of it, is they're attracted to the surge of glucose and the surge of epinephrine. So yes, you can do it. You can easily trigger it accidentally.
I would trigger it a lot at work by accident when I get really busy, like rush time. Like,
Oh yeah.
I get really anxious
Mm-hmm.
and then like, be
Mm-hmm.
like full of energy, like almost all over the place. And then afterwards, I would crash.
Yes. You're faced with a stressful situation where you have a lot of demands, and you may have noticed one of the things about the fight or flight response is that time seems to slow down, and you process things so much better, and you know exactly how you're going to do things, because in a fight or flight response, we're sending so much energy, so much sugar and oxygen to the brain that the brain is working faster. And people have reported that in a real crisis event, time seems to slow down or stand still, because all you're doing is chopping it up into smaller and smaller segments. Time is still moving, but you process it at a much faster pace, and you can figure out exactly what you're going to do. And you seem like you have all the time in the world you need to do what you've got to do. And you seem to be, and you're very efficient in your actions. Took a lot of energy to do that. And then you crash at the end. That's very common among people. The concept of it being in an accident and watching it develop in front of you, and you're aware of it, and you suddenly realize at time, you thought, well, that took forever for that to, it's like you're watching it in slow motion. So it's a phenomenon that occurs frequently. So the sympathetic division is more of a systemic effect here, the way it happens. Now, the neurotransmitters involved are, on the sympathetic side, are norepinephrine and epinephrine. Norepinephrine comes from the postganglionic fibers. Now, if you remember, the autonomic system uses a two neuron pathway. Skeletal muscle uses one neuron. Autonomic uses two neurons. They use either a preganglionic and a postganglionic, meaning that they have a neuron that leads to, that connects to a second neuron. There's a synapse in the middle here. You got a preganglionic neuron and a postganglionic neuron. You use neurotransmitters at both. Everybody uses acetylcholine, both sympathetic and parasympathetic. Everybody uses acetylcholine for your preganglionic neurons. Parasympathetic also uses acetylcholine for its postganglionic. Sympathetic uses norepinephrine as its postganglionic. So it also gets epinephrine directly from the adrenal medulla. So we have all these things going on in a sympathetic response. The fight, fright, or flight response. The fright means you're just sort of like, you go into the zombie mode, you don't know what you're doing because you can't process. We shut down the gut. We don't care about the gut. We shut down all of our sphincters. We don't care about our urinary system, don't care about the reproductive system. The detrusor muscle relaxes, so the scrotum and the testes are suspended lower from the abdominal wall to keep them cooler. The whole reason that males have their testes in the scrotum is temperature related, because sperm cells have to develop at about 94 degrees instead of 98 degrees because of the enzymes on the head of the sperm. So males keep their gamete productive cells outside the body, outside at least the abdominal cavity anyway. So when the detrusor muscle relaxes, the testes drop further down so they can stay cooler. Because we don't care about, during a fight or flight, you're not worried about, Am I producing healthy sperm right now? It's not something you think about. The ciliary muscles around your lens changes the shape so that you can see very well in the distance. And your pupils enlarge. So a great deal of light can come in. An individual who is experiencing a fight or flight response often says their eyes became huge. You know, that you're like, because the pupils opened way up. Okay, now the heart rate will go up. Epinephrine will be dumped into the heart at the pacemaker of the heart, the SA node. It will increase the heart rate. The force of the heart rate will increase. The heart will become more powerful in its pumping. That means it will raise the blood pressure. We'll send more blood out to the organs that need it, like the brain, the heart. The heart gets its own circulation too. The brain, the lungs, and the muscles. The skin and everything, and all the unessentials are not going to be supplied. The airway will increase. The breathing rate will increase. The airways will dilate, and we'll see a surge in blood sugar. It's when we get this spike of everything going on, it tails off very slowly. It takes a long time to break down this epinephrine and norepinephrine in the body. Acetylcholine breaks down quickly, so parasympathetic responses are over and done. But sympathetic responses take time to wear out. Okay. Now, the sympathetic and parasympathetic neurons affect different organs differently. The same organ can be innervated by both sympathetic and parasympathetic neurons. The heart gets the sympathetic, gets the cardiac nerve telling it to speed up, but it also gets the vagus nerve telling it to slow down. So that's dual innervation. The airway gets innervated by the sympathetic side to constrict and to relax on the parasympathetic side. Now, where do all these neurons come from? Well, the parasympathetic nervous system sends out its axons in two locations, at the brain and at the sacrum, at the top and the bottom of the spinal cord, essentially. And the sympathetic neurons come out in the middle. In they say thoracic and lumbar regions, so of the spinal cord. So we have these two different areas here. Let me see, there. This picture right here, you can see the parasympathetics in purple. Everything's coming out from either the brain or the sacral region down to bottom, as opposed to the sympathetic side, where all the neurons, all the axons are coming out either the thoracic region or the lumbar region, right in the middle. So two distinct differences here. The other thing is, notice the length of the neurons. Notice the length of the neurons. The preganglionic neurons on the sympathetic side are very short. The postganglionic neurons are very long. Notice how long they are, going like to the eye, the skin, the lungs, the heart. They're very long postganglionic neurons. The cell bodies are very close on the sympathetic side, are very close to the spinal cord. On the parasympathetic side, the cell bodies are near the glands, near the effectors, near the muscles. The parasympathetic side has very long preganglionic neurons and very short postganglionic. These little light purple things over here, these are the postganglionic neurons here. See how short they are. These are the dark purple, are the preganglionics. Over here on the sympathetic side, these are the preganglionics. They're all relatively short, and the postganglionics are very long. So, what does all that mean? Well, who knows? Who knows why they're that way? There's a reason for that, I'm sure. Yeah. And I already said all that. And I said all that too. So now, okay, so what do we need to remember about all this? Well, let me go back a couple slides here. I want to show you, just remind you all the way back to this one. Don't forget the role of the neurotransmitters. Everybody's preganglionic neurons use acetylcholine. Sympathetic side uses norepinephrine as its postganglionic neurotransmitter. It uses acetylcholine for its preganglionic. It uses norepinephrine as its postganglionic. On the parasympathetic side, it uses acetylcholine for both. Okay, now let me go back to where I was. Now, what about the sensory neurons here in the viscera? We know that the autonomic nervous system is muscle and glands. It has nothing, it's all, motor activity. It has nothing to do with sensory neurons. However, the sensory neurons are going to trigger autonomic responses. For example, we have blood pressure receptors located in the aorta. The largest vessel in our blood vessel in our body comes right up out of the heart. Blood leaving the left side of the heart under high pressure comes up in the aorta, and the aorta dives right down and goes through the diaphragm and becomes the abdominal aorta. Blood is under high pressure right there. We monitor that pressure in the aortic arch, and we also monitor that pressure in the carotid sinus, or the carotid arteries split to go up into the brain. So we're monitoring that pressure. What happens if our pressure gets too low? We have visceral sensory neurons that tell us that, and that will trigger an autonomic response. So detecting a change in pressure will trigger an autonomic response. Sensory input, it's just like, it's like the spinal reflex. You put your hand down on something hot, you yank your hand back. You trigger that sensory input, triggers a response. If you raise the pressure, if your blood pressure goes up, it'll raise an autonomic response. If blood pressure goes down, it'll trigger an autonomic response. So these sensory neurons are going to be picking up changes in chemistry and stretch and pressure and temperature and irritation. And they're going to lead to responses. They're going to lead to autonomic subconscious responses. Most of these receptors are just nothing more than free nerve endings. They're dendrites. That's all they are. Just the raw dendrite. Now, the problem with these sensory receptors is that they also lead us into referred pain. Because this is, we've talked about referred pain a couple times. Yes, they're doing a great job telling us all about stretch or pressure or anything like this, but the motor nerves, the autonomic neurons are going to be the same, the sensory neurons going back up to the spinal cord and to the brain are going along the same pathway. They're side by side with the axons of the motor nerves going out. So the motor nerves that are going to tell you, the autonomic motor nerves telling you to do something, they're going to be sharing space with the sensory nerves coming back into the central nervous system. And so if you have a pain in your belly caused by your heart having a heart attack, you're getting a pain that like, why am I getting a pain here? You know, why am I getting a pain in my abdomen? You know, where's that? Why do I have a pain in my left arm? The pain receptors that are located in your heart for a heart attack, those neurons are running along the same pathways that the motor neurons travel to the arm or to the abdomen. So they're sharing that pathway. So the motor neurons that sends a signal out to the arm or to the abdomen or to the lower jaw is actually getting a signal coming back up on it, saying, hey, it's, I've got some pain here. And that tends to fool us into thinking that we have pain, not in our heart, but in our left arm or in our abdomen or our lower jaw. Three common, and even over your shoulder, three common locations for heart attack pain are the jaw, the abdomen, or the left arm. And sometimes it really is just a sore left arm, and sometimes it's just a toothache, and sometimes it's a bellyache, and other times it's the heart. Yeah.
My dad's been having gallbladder problems, and it's been bothering his heart. Like he's been feeling it in his heart, but it's his gallbladder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the nerve that is innervating the nerve that's innervating the gallbladder to release bile is going to be getting signals from the heart too, are going to pass through those same nerves. And how do we interpret that? We got a pain signal. We don't know where it's coming from. Every time, think about this. When you hit your elbow, the olecranon process, remember the olecranon process, your elbow, you hit your elbow on a hard surface, you stimulate the ulnar nerve underneath. What do we call it? We just hit our what? Our funny bone. Where do we feel it? In your fingers. Because the motor nerves that go out to your fingers, the autonomic nerves that are going to control the blood vessels, are sharing space with the pain receptors that were stimulated here. And so your fingers are going to tingle and be a little numb, but your elbow's not going to hurt. You smack your elbow, you're going to feel it down here. It's referred pain. Can't emphasize enough that referred pain can throw us a real curve when we're evaluating a patient. Pain doesn't always tell us enough information. Now if your patient's laying there screaming with a 2x4 stuck in their abdomen and they're bleeding out, it's like, well, yeah, it's probably the 2x4 stuck in their belly, that may be the cause of it. No, I don't think it's their big toe causing a problem here. I think it might be that 2x4 stuck there. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. My mom's friend had a major heart attack. She
Okay.
had to be shocked 15 times.
Okay. Wow.
But after that, she went into constant seizures. Could it have been the heart attack that caused her seizures? Because she's put into a medically induced coma because they couldn't get her to calm down.
Well, I mean, it's, every time you're hitting somebody with pretty powerful shock every time, you can disturb the, you're going to disturb the central nervous system. Granted, you're already in a terrified state trying to get the heart to start up again. And you got chemical imbalances occurring when the heart has stopped. And so to be shocked and shocked and shocked again, it's sort of like resetting the brain and spinal cord every time too. And that could be the trigger for that. Did she eventually recover or how?
The neurologist isn't hopeful.
Oh,
She has they found brain swelling and they're not hopeful.
Yeah.
And they don't think she's there mentally.
see, that's the problem. When the brain starts to swell, you've got real issues then, because there's no space for the brain to expand in.
Yeah.
So that's a shame. So, but sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Okay. Now the viscera is going to throw us a curve all the time. We're not going to know always, gallbladder pain, for example, over the right shoulder, very common pain for the gallbladder, but also for pneumonia and sometimes for a heart attack. Sometimes back pain is just back pain. Sometimes it's a sore shoulder, and sometimes it's the gallbladder. You might be a little more confident if their gallbladder's been removed, or their appendix has been removed. You might be a little more confident that it's not their appendix or their gallbladder. But you have to get all that information out, because patients don't share stuff. Healthcare providers are supposed to know intuitively what's wrong with you. If you don't say anything to your healthcare provider, they're not going to know, or that as you're going on, oh, and by the way, I've got this crushing pain in my chest and I can barely breathe, but other than that, I feel fine. I'll see you next week. So anyway, the visceral reflexes are a little bit different than spinal reflexes. Not the typical reflex arc that we have on a spinal reflex, where we have the sensory receptor, the sensory neuron, the integration neuron, the motor neuron, and the effector. That's what we have with a spinal reflex. But in a visceral reflex, we have two neurons on the motor side, not just one. The afferent side has a sensory neuron, but the efferent side has two motor neurons. It's a two-step process. Now, where do we get these? Well, the reflexes that empty our bowel and bladder areas, because we've got two sets of sphincters. The internal sphincter at our anus is under autonomic control. The external sphincter is under skeletal muscle control, but we can override that. The same thing at our urethra. The urinary bladder has an internal sphincter under autonomic control and an external sphincter under skeletal muscle control, but again, it gets overridden by the autonomic side. So we have visceral reflexes that always win. Ultimately, they always win. So, and this is what the visceral reflex looks like. The motor neuron, the effector side here, you'll see it has a preganglionic and a postganglionic neuron before it gets to the effector. And so it's going to use acetylcholine for its preganglionic neurotransmitter. And it may use acetylcholine for its postganglionic neurotransmitter, but it also could be a sympathetic effect. Because remember what happens to the urinary bladder in a fight or flight response. It shuts down. The bowels shut down. The anal sphincter shuts down. So we have dual innervation here on structures like that. Okay. So what about the neurotransmitters? Well, we know it's only acetylcholine and norepinephrine. Acetylcholine is the same thing that we use at skeletal muscle. We have what are known as cholinergic fibers. Get it? Acetylcholine, cholinergic fibers release the acetylcholine. So all of the preganglionic neurons for everything have cholinergic fibers. It doesn't matter, sympathetic or parasympathetic, both are using acetylcholine on the preganglionic side. And the parasympathetic uses it at the postganglionic side. Cholinergic fibers. The receptors, before I get ahead of myself, norepinephrine uses adrenergic fibers. The postganglionic sympathetic neurons use adrenergic fibers. The old term for adrenaline. Norepinephrine and epinephrine used to be called adrenaline, for it was identified that there were two different things. Now, the action at the effector depends on whether you're being innervated by a by what neurotransmitter? Is it a cholinergic? Is it acetylcholine, or is it norepinephrine? And you're going to have a receptor. If it's acetylcholine, you're going to have a receptor, a cholinergic receptor. If it's norepinephrine, you're going to have an adrenergic receptor. And that's going to dictate what the response is. Because if you have if you have two nerves going there, one from sympathetic, one from parasympathetic, you're going to have one of the other responses. Like I said, the heart has parasympathetic stimulation to slow it down and sympathetic stimulation to speed it up. So, and again, there's our norepinephrine and acetylcholine. But we've got to have receptors in place. So we have cholinergic receptors for acetylcholine. Here we always have cholinergic receptors at the end of the preganglionic neuron because everybody's releasing acetylcholine. And we have adrenergic receptors for norepinephrine. Now this is a sympathetic system here with a preganglionic neuron, a postganglionic neuron, acetylcholine on the preganglionic neuron, and norepinephrine on the postganglionic neuron. We have adrenergic receptors on the effector cell at the postganglionic neuron, and we have cholinergic receptors for acetylcholine at the preganglionic neuron. Now there's two types of cholinergic receptors. There are what's called nicotinic and muscarinic. Nicotinic receptors and muscarinic receptors, they're named, and it's only related to the name based on how the drugs mimic the effects of acetylcholine. Nicotine lands on receptor sites in the brain and can be excitatory. And so nicotinic receptors are where acetylcholine lands and it has an excitatory response. Skeletal muscle on the motor end plate has nicotinic receptors because acetylcholine landing on the motor end plate is excitatory. Muscarinic receptors are inhibitory. So nicotinic receptors on all of on the preganglionic and on the postganglionic parasympathetic neurons. A nicotinic receptor is always going to be excitatory. The muscarinic receptor can be either or. It depends. It can be inhibitory. It can be excitatory. It is inhibitory in the heart. Muscarinic receptors in the heart are inhibitory. The heart rate slows down. That's what we want to do. If we weren't sending acetylcholine to the heart, our heart rate, instead of being at 70 beats a minute, would be 100 beats a minute. But the same acetylcholine, when it lands on the gut, becomes excitatory because we have muscarinic receptors there. So we have the muscarinic receptors on the heart and the gut. In the heart, they're inhibitory. In the gut, they're excitatory, depending on what we want to do with them. The adrenergic receptors are going to respond to epinephrine or norepinephrine. There are two types, alpha receptors and beta receptors. Norepinephrine, when it lands on, for example, it depends on the receptor as to what the action is going to be. Norepinephrine is not always going to be an excitatory. We think epinephrine, adrenaline, get things going, excitatory, whatever. It's not always the case. Norepinephrine, when it goes into the heart, causes the heart to speed up. Epinephrine causes the airway to relax. Sometimes norepinephrine and epinephrine are inhibitory. They're not always excitatory. It depends on the type of receptor there. You know, beta receptors, there is a whole class of medications called beta blockers. Beta blockers regulate blood pressure and heart rate. An individual with hypertension, one of the more common types of drugs to treat hypertension, high blood pressure, is to use a drug called a beta blocker. It blocks the receptor sites on the heart, so that while norepinephrine can be released into the heart, the receptors are blocked, so the heart rate is going to be lower. A lower heart rate drops the blood pressure. If the heart rate is normally running at 70, and your patient's taking a beta blocker, their heart rate may be running about 58, which brings their pressure down. Because hypertension is bad. Hypertension kills people slowly. And that's one of the big frustrations in healthcare, is that people with hypertension don't take their medication. So, because they feel fine. Hey, I feel great today. 30 years later, my kidneys are shot, I'm about to have a stroke, and my heart's the size of a football because of the hypertension. Yeah, really. So, because of hypertension. So as I said, you know, it depends on the receptors. It depends on whether or not it also depends on whether or not we're going to have both the sympathetic and parasympathetic dumping into the same organ. Most organs are going to be dual innervated. I got it out right that time. But they're usually going to be antagonistic. They're going to work against each other. They're going to work against each other. The sympathetic side is the dominant side. Its antagonist is going to be, the parasympathetic is the dominant side. The sympathetic is its antagonist. But they work together so we can maintain a constant level of homeostasis here. You know, we want to have the heart rate just right for whatever we're doing. If you're going to run up a flight of stairs, I don't know why you want to, but you know, Cameron, you decided you're going to run up the stairs, you know, 10 times. You lost a bet. I don't know, whatever.
I'm feeling my brains.
Yeah, there you go. So you're going to race up and down the steps. Now, your sympathetic side is going to get involved here and say, hey, you know, the heart's working faster here, but I'm going to need more oxygen. So you're going to open up your airway, and I'm going to need more glucose. And so you're going to be drawing all these other activities in here to power up the heart. And now your lungs are going to be working faster because you're trying to get rid of all the CO2 that you're generating. You're blowing off that extra CO2 because you're becoming a little more acidic. So, and you need more glucose. So your liver is going to be receiving epinephrine and glucagon, saying, hey, how about some more glucose? You know, and then as soon as you're done, then the parasympathetic side is going to kick in and say, hey, you know, let's rebuild the glucose. Let's calm the heart down. Let's relax the airway. You know, let's do all this nice stuff. So the functions of the sympathetic and parasympathetic side are going to go back and forth constantly. You know, it's very rare to have an overall systemic effect where one is dominant. It's fight or flight is not our usual state of homeostasis. We're usually in the parasympathetic side. We go into fight or flight, and then we come back out of it. You know, most things are going to be antagonistic. You know, if the sympathetic system raises the heart rate, the parasympathetic will lower the heart rate. If the sympathetic side increases the respiratory rate and blocks digestion, the parasympathetic will lower the breathing rate and increase the processing of digestion. So they work against each other constantly, and all things are, you know, it's all working to the same goal. Now, there are very few places where they work together. But one of these places here Well, it's in the sexual response is one of the few places where we see them working together. Parasympathetic brings us to the point of arousal. Sympathetic takes us to the point of orgasm. They work together in male and female sexual response. We maintain, again, they're going to be working in most other organ systems. It's going to be antagonistic. That's the only one that we see where they work together, where the two systems work together. Let's see. And I said that, and I said that already. So now, a couple of things here that are unusual in the sympathetic side. We're just about done. I'll wrap this up here. The adrenal medulla, our sweat glands, the erector pili muscles, the ability for our little hairs on our skin to rise up. That's the erector pili muscles. We do that when we get goosebumps, we get cold. That's a sympathetic response. Next time you get cold and you have goosebumps, say, oh, look, it's a sympathetic response. And people will tend to start easing away from you in a crowd. So happens to me all the time. The kidneys are innervated as a sympathetic side too. Blood vessels, the narrowing of our blood vessels, the relaxing of our blood vessels are pretty much always a sympathetic response. In AP2, we'll talk a lot about vasoconstriction and vasodilation. They are almost all these are innervated strictly sympathetically. The other thing is that our response to temperature is a sympathetic side only. If we get hot, the sympathetic system allows us to enlarge our blood vessels and open up blood flow to the skin to radiate body heat. When we cool down, the parasympathetic doesn't take over. We just stop sending signals to open up the vessels. See, norepinephrine controls the diameter of our blood vessels. So if we want our blood vessels to open wide, we just stop releasing norepinephrine. If we want to close our blood vessels, we release a lot of norepinephrine. Parasympathetic doesn't have anything to say about it. So depending on temperature, we either release a lot of norepinephrine and constrict. On a cold day, we don't want to send a lot of blood to the skin and lose heat. So we restrict the flow by releasing a lot of norepinephrine. On a hot day, we won't send any norepinephrine out. The vessel will enlarge. Blood flow will go to the skin and will radiate heat. Sympathetic system controls, has a large thing to play about our blood pressure. We'll talk about this in AP2. And I've already been talking about metabolic effects all along. I want to bring one more thing in here. There we go. A condition known as Raynaud's disease or Raynaud's disease in here. This has to do with vasoconstriction. Sometimes we overdo the release of norepinephrine to our blood vessels. Sometimes we are we get an exaggerated response when we get cold. Because, who hasn't said, well, my face is numb on a cold day, or my fingers are numb? Well, what will happen? That's because we're reducing blood flow to the skin. That norepinephrine vasoconstricts the blood vessels, and so we don't want to lose body heat, but sometimes it overdoes it. And sometimes we have so powerful a vasoconstrictive response that our skin, we develop cyanosis. And again, the way to detect cyanosis is look at the nail beds. Fingernail beds will always tell you that. Doesn't forget skin color. Skin color will throw you a curve. You can't, nail beds never lie because the nail beds will always turn blue when a person's developing cyanosis, meaning they're not getting enough blood flow through here. The lips and the nail beds are your indicators. And so what will happen here is with Raynaud's disease, you have exaggerated release of norepinephrine, vasoconstricting too much. So, and that is the end of chapter 14, just on time. Okay, anybody have any questions or any more questions? Okay, then I'm going to get us out of here. I've sent everybody emails on the date of when we're having our exam. And you have the option of taking it in the classroom or online. If it, I'm leaving it open for 24 hours online. If you're going to take it on ground, I'll be here all day, the day of the exam.
So we can come in whenever.
You can come in whenever on test day.
I'll be here Tuesday.
Okay, that's fine.
You know, what's considered all day, because I might wait a little bit after the original, like 10 or whatever.
Oh, I'll be here till 3.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be here. I'll get in here about 8:30, about 8 o'clock, and I'll be here till 3. So, because I have nothing else better to do except wait for you all to take a test. So, so anybody that wants to come in and take the hard copy on ground, I'll be here all day. I'll be here till 3 o'clock. And otherwise, you'll have till 12:15 the following day to finish your test. Yes.
Are we still going over the final review?
No. So I have already posted a review for you. It is exactly it's a video of this exact same thing I would have done today.
Okay.
So you don't have to.
Is that running through that PowerPoint that's on eLearn?
It's on eLearn, yeah.
Okay.
So you can,
If I study the review for the final, I should be able to.
if you go through the review to the final, and that really helped a lot last semester. So, and
I'm trusting you when you say that they can only ask the same kind of questions.
okay, I also opened up exam 3 to study. I put it into a study mode for you. So, and if everybody gets, as soon as, well, I'm hoping that we'll get exam 4 done quickly. I can go do that too. But at least the first 3 exams, the ones that are the oldest, are now open to study. Yes.
Can you look at my exam?
2? Yeah, I'll be glad to.
You kept finding the last example of that. 4.
And yours on 4.
Yes.
Okay, I will be happy to. If anybody else wants me to take a look at an exam, shoot me an email. I'll be glad to go over it for you. I have no problem with that whatsoever. So, okay, so we're going to get out of here and I'll get this posted and we'll be done. We're done with the semester.